Hold on. Hold on. Hey, Vicky, you're back.
Yes.
Okay, let me see what network I'm on. I'm on the better network, but I think we lost the stream. So I'm just going to, no, we're live.
Oh,
Okay. Hi, can
awesome.
everybody see us again? Sorry about that. Let's see if we're back. I apologize for that. That is my internet network problem. And my boyfriend's giving me thumbs up. I think we are back. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. Hopefully, this version of the stream looks better. David says it's Wednesday, so David just started the stream. Okay, I guess that's hopefully working. So again, sorry everybody, that's my internet and my fault, and we're going to go right back into our conversation. Again, we are live, so if you have Neumorphism questions, comments, thoughts, we want to hear them. So I'm going to jump into another thing you and I had agreed we were going to talk about. We have both seen articles and people posting on LinkedIn. When I or someone else has said, "Gee, this design doesn't really look good. It's way too subtle. It's bad for accessibility in multiple ways. I don't think this is the right way to go." I've had people say like, "Oh, calm down. I'm just having some fun," or calm down. I'm just being creative. I think that was something someone said to me last year. Don't worry about it. I'm just being creative. I guess I would ask you, what kinds of reactions have you heard? And is it still fun and creative if it's not usable?
Yeah, so I actually ran into a few articles and a few like responses on my article is that I'm being too serious about this and that design should be, like fun and you should be like experimenting, new design trend, like if it's out there, just to explore, the possibility and stuff. So my first thought is that I mean, if it's fun and experimental, then you can do it on like by yourself, and you can do it on the side if you want. It's really up to you, but like when you think about like making a real product out of it and try to like push for that, it's not gonna go so well because it's not passing any accessibility requirements. So I would say that if you want to practice on your own, like do your thing and do whatever, but don't really try to implement it in a real working product. And I do see that people try to push that as well. And the problem is that it's still run into a few accessibility issue, and people just really try really hard to make it work. However, it's just going to be tough. I mean, maybe a few years from now on, somebody like tried a way, like figured out a way to make it work, but at the moment, we don't really have that.
Yeah, and it sounds like some people have had reactions to neumorphism and have written articles like, well, maybe it's not good for accessibility, but here's some ways you can make it more accessible. When you think about accessibility, is it okay to take something and make it a little more accessible? What's your perspective when you see those articles?
So I actually run into one where they try to design a button with neumorphism a little bit more accessible, where what they did was they added a border around it, but it's a very subtle border. And
Okay.
still, we run into the same problem where there's no contrast ratio. You cannot really tell the stage of the buttons. So, I mean, people are trying to like experimenting like ways to fix it, but there are like a lot of things to think about, not just visual side of it. Like, got to think about like how the user actually like interact with it and how is their experience on the actual like product. So it's not just about like how it looks. So we got to think a lot more about the usability side of it as well.
Yeah, it seems like this is the kind of thing where if people did some testing, if people were
Mhm.
to do some usability testing and things like that, that we would quickly know if new morphism is succeeding for us or failing for us. I mean, we can be testing with people without disabilities, people with disabilities. I haven't seen any articles about anybody running usability tests on this. Have you run into into any articles saying, "Oh, we ran a test and this was awesome. Colorblind people loved it."
No, I actually never ran into any articles like that because I don't think anyone actually like like run like build a product with it yet because I think they do realize that it's not really working. So what happened is I actually show this type of UI to some of my non-designer friends, and actually they came up with a few questions to like add. They were like, I think the main issue is that they don't know if this is something they can click on or not, and sometimes the border is too subtle that they don't know if this is a button or it is not a button. So it create that confusion.
Yeah, I saw a couple
Yeah.
of examples of neumorphism where it looked like the button was implied, like there was some sort of shape of the button, but you only kind of knew there was a button there because there was like a little shadow around it, implying button
Yeah.
shape, but not like a clear line or a clear rounded rectangle. And so it sounds like there's a lot
Yeah.
to guess. So it's interesting that you did some kind of guerrilla testing, like, hey, look at this. What's going on here?
Yeah, like for like normal vision people, like we see it and like the at the first look, it might look like, oh, this looks kind of like pretty and looks modern looking and stuff. So I think that's why a lot of people, like really want to try get into it, and that's how like the trend kind of started, and now it's just spread like so big at the moment. I still see like so many people like posting their like products and UI shot with that where it's not really usable at all.
Yeah, I think I saw
So
some
yeah,
on Dribble or Behance, like, ooh, look at this thing I designed. And you could say, well, that looks slick or it looks modern. But obviously, if you put your UX hat on, the question is it usable?
Mhm. Yeah, and I actually like ran into people who like send me their UX portfolio, and it's basically on dribbles with a lot of neumorphism stuff going on, and I was like, this is like just straight visual design that you do for fun if you're like trying to apply for a job or things like that with like just a portfolio full of neumorphism and usability at all, then it's not really it's not gonna help you so much here. Yeah.
And you had sent me an article, and we won't name names, but you had sent me an article where the person who claims to have invented neumorphism was writing an article in response to some of the comments that have been going around that it's not accessible. And I remember, I think, was it one of the things he said was that neumorphism is fun?
Yeah, I think one of the things that person point out is that it should be fun and design should be fun. I mean, like if you're talking about like the visual art, like art and design fun, then you can go with it. But if you claim yourself as a product designer, where you design for people who's interacting with this certain products, um, like it's just not like realistic like at all to apply neumorphism because basically it's not going to work for everyone. So
No,
if you claim yourself
who's
as
it going? I mean, I don't have memory disabilities, I don't have visual disabilities, but when I saw neumorphism, I feel like it really lacked those typical affordances that we're used to seeing, where the button looks and feels like the button, and other elements have that obviousness that we often call an affordance. I felt like
Mhm.
that's what was lacking. Can you think of anything that you saw that you also felt was kind of lacking?
I also think because the point of neumorphism is like the subtleness, and so the buttons or like the object itself usually is the same color as the background, and the only thing that separates them is the shadow. So because of the use of the same color, that doesn't really help like differentiate the background and the object at all. So
And
I think that's the problem as well.
yeah, and again, we're not going to name names, and I'm not going to put up links to the articles, but I'm going back to the new morphism article that you sent me, where the guy who claims he invented it was trying to defend it, and I want to try to describe some of what I'm seeing on the screen and talk about it. So there's one example where the guy says, "Look, a simple slider, the old-fashioned way, doesn't make sense." and the version that I did is much better. And what he shows is a white slider on a white background. Yes, I can agree with him that that doesn't make sense, but it also seems like it goes with said no one ever. I don't know who expects to be a successful visual designer and
Mhm,
and try to show some sort of slider or progress bar that is white on white with a soft shadow. And then he claims his is better because he is a bright orange bar where this was a white bar.
mhm.
I guess that's
I
better,
think
but back to you. What do you think?
I think like he tried to solve the problem of the inner progress bar, but like if you're talking about like the whole bar itself is still not visible enough to see.
Right.
So it still runs into the same problem.
And it's also not clear to me, and I know people can't see this, but so imagine you have a rounded rectangle and there is a color filling up about two-thirds of it. And in his article, he's saying this is a slider. But when I see this rounded rectangle and I see the color filling up two-thirds to it, my brain says this is a progress bar. Did this look to you
Mhm.
like a slider or a toggle, or what did it look like to you?
Actually, the whole time, when I first read this article, I thought it was a progress bar and did not know it was some type of slider at all. So I just recently just kind of reread it, and then I was like, have that aha moment that, it was like, oh my God, like that's not what I thought the whole entire time. So I think a lot of people run into the same problem. I mean, you did too. So I think like there will be a lot more people kind of don't understand it completely.
Yeah, I mean
So I
it's
think that's
bad
the
for
point.
accessibility, but I can't figure it out, and
Yeah,
I don't currently have accessibility needs other than sometimes I wear glasses for distance.
yeah. I think like one of the are if someone like kind of trying to push back with me about this stuff, I usually like think of an example where I ask them again, like imagine if you are buying stuff on Amazon and everything is like neumorphism, or maybe some of the elements are neumorphism. Um, it's gonna interrupt the buying flow. It's gonna interrupt like customer going through like the funnel. So things like that is going to be effective as well, not just like the visual design of it.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
I
going to
want
interrupt
to
the whole
sorry, go ahead.
uh, experience. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just on his article, and I want to quote some of it to people. I don't know if you have the article open also, but he says it's like building a UI from Play-Doh, which if you didn't grow up probably in America, Play-Doh is that plasticine is kind of a soft, colorful clay that children use. And his article says it forms itself nicely. It's soft to the touch figuratively. Blah 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 blah. It's not a serious design style. Well, then when would we use this? He says it's not a serious design style, but it doesn't have to be one. That's a quote. And he says, I've been advocating for years about adding fun into the rather unnecessarily complex and serious design process. So I wish we could ask all of these visual designers with their Behance and Dribble and UI shot and whatever, if this isn't a serious design style and it's not meant to be one, why are you trying to do projects in it? Have you uncovered anything on that, junior detective?
No, actually not. Because I feel like, if you want to go for that, then, if you're trying to get a job or something like that, it's going to be very tough on you to even explain like why like go with this route, right? So I think when you talk about like creativity and like fun and stuff, like if you do it on your own, again, like nobody can stop you, right? But when you do it for like, you know, usability and accessibility. And again, like when I talk about disability, a lot of people think about like, somebody who's like on a wheelchair, or somebody has a physical, disability. But if you think about it, we have like other type of disability too. And every buttons, every text, every element is gonna matters a lot, and it's gonna affect their experience.
Oh yeah, I
So yeah.
mean, outside of Neumorphism, when everybody makes a tiny checkbox and my mouse has to get exactly on that checkbox, I have such a hard time getting my mouse exactly on that checkbox, even though even I don't have a disability need, so I can't imagine everybody else. That checkbox must be mostly unclickable. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and I'll check if we have any questions or comments from LinkedIn or YouTube today. People are applauding you. Good news, you're getting lots of claps. We've got 4 people in YouTube and 6 people in LinkedIn. Thanks to everybody for dealing with the second stream popping up. So our first stream died, our second stream came back. We'll get them both on YouTube later, so you can watch this together. But I know that you and I were thinking about the role of the designer. When we think about someone who is a specialist visual designer, sometimes we think about someone who makes something pretty, or they make it work for our brand colors and mood and things like that. What else would you say is important for visual designers to know and do?
So like for visual designer and like product designer, we are responsible. Like we have the ability to, um, you know, design for everyone. And a lot of designers, like they claim and they want to design for everyone, but when they think of everyone, they kind of leave out the disability, like the disabled users. So as a designer, you need to think about like the all the users that you are doing this for, not just normal vision people or like normal people. So as a designer, basically just can make the difference, not just rely on like the accessibility like department, like, oh, they're gonna deal with that. Like it's really start with you, like, because imagine if you have a design team and everyone care about accessibility, you're going to create a very universal products that is going to target as many people as you can.
Yeah, I think
So
sometimes people forget that their customers, I mean, in most cases, I can think of a few exceptions, but in most cases, your customers are blind, your customers are colorblind, your customers have physical disabilities, your customers surf the web with their voice, they surf the web with the tab key and the keyboard, they don't use a mouse. There are people who surf the web or use computers with foot switches because they don't use a mouse. There are so many other ways for people to interact with our digital devices that we can't just think. I know some people, I had a battle a few weeks ago with a company I tried to use and then dumped immediately because you couldn't tab through anything. But they tried to tell me it was accessible because it worked with a screen reader. And I said, well, then you don't understand accessibility because congratulations, you made it work for somebody blind. But if somebody has a motion issue and tabs through stuff, or if I just want to tab through stuff because it's easier for me, this doesn't work. And they were like completely confused by what I was saying. They were sure that they had made their thing accessible because a screen reader will read it.
yeah, so like I do think like now people like company still think that they don't really have disabled users, and actually that's one of like some of the research that I did a few weeks ago. So basically there are about 61 million you know American who are disabled. So think about those 61 million people who have some sort of, physical or, visual and, mental disability. They are your customers too. So people like companies often like forget about that. They don't really realize the big numbers that we have. Basically, that's like 1 in 4 people who have some sort of disability. And, if your product is not accessible, then you lost a tons of customers already. Yeah.
Yeah, and in my book, I interviewed a couple of people that were relevant to this. I interviewed someone who was colorblind to talk about colorblindness, and I interviewed someone who works with deaf people about how often deaf people get left behind, especially when people are putting up videos. Unfortunately, I'm on that list. I YouTube does the auto captioning and I don't go in and manually make my captions or proofread them. I am lazy, and I'm doing the wrong things and I have guilt over it. But at least with our visual design, I believe that all visual designers should get training in accessibility, in the standards, whether those are some of the governmental standards of where you live, because everybody here listening is in a different place, or the WCAG standards. David Snodgrass is giving us a comment, and he says, also consider on mobile device, low contrast
Hmm.
can affect everyone because of ambient brightness. Yes, we actually,
Yeah.
Vicky said that in part one before I had an internet meltdown. She did remind us that sometimes you are out in the sun with your laptop, with your phone, and some of the subtleties of neumorphism where it's a slight color change. I saw one neumorphism example that was like, this type of button will be this color blue. This type of button will be a slightly lighter blue. And then this like other type of thing will be slightly lighter blue. And I'm thinking, again, I can't make sense of that. That's like some sort of weird color language that I don't want to have to learn for every site I go to.
Yeah.
Stephanie is here. She's writing on YouTube. She says yes, like that. Yes, most design schools don't even teach about basic color accessibility. So
Mhm.
juniors, can
Yeah.
you think of some good resources or books, or if someone is working in UX now, or they're a junior, or they want to get into UX, do you have some suggested reads or blogs that they should check out to learn more about accessibility?
Yeah, so definitely, for the first part you mentioned, like how school didn't really like teach visual accessibility. I think I ran into the same issue where like school didn't really teach any of that at all. Like we got like we talked about like color contrast and a little bit of like color combination, but not anything about like accessibility. And I think that is totally like it's a miss out. And for resources, there are a lot of websites that gonna help you to like um, color test your contrast ratio and elements. It's gonna tell you if this passed the accessibility requirements or not. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna link them in the comment, I think, after the chat, so that everyone can access to it.
Yeah,
And
just send it to
also,
me and I'll make sure it's in the YouTube video description for the archive.
gotcha. Yeah. So there's like a lot of resource out there. You can test like color blindness as well. Like you can it's like a simulation where you can see what the other, like what does it look like to a color like blind person. So there's like a lot of resources out there. And so as a visual designer, as a product designer, yeah, I encourage you to test those out before you launch your product.
I actually have one on my phone right now, and I'm going to take a picture of us. Hold on, camera. Okay, so I keep on my phone a color blindness tool, which again simulates color blindness. But then you can kind of take a look at something with it, and go, oh, holy cats! This is not good. So let me see if I can show you the picture I just took. Um, Come on, phone, don't do that to me. I'm having a crazy technology day. Here it is. So again, people listening later, it's going to be hard for you to see, but those of you who are watching the screen right now will see that my picture is very, very orangey and blue, and a lot of the colors that you guys are seeing from me and Vicky, from our backgrounds and our faces, those colors are not there. And so it's great if you're working on something and you care about color blindness. This tool, of course, doesn't simulate everything, but it can certainly give you a clue when you are stepping in the dog poop of not being friendly to color blindness. Stephanie says she wants to plug an article she wrote that because schools don't teach this, and she got a lot of students asking about tools to test. Stephanie, plug away. We'll add it to the description. Ruchita is here. I hope I'm pronouncing you okay. You said, what are your thoughts on starting with an accessible design bottom up in contrast with designing and then testing for accessibility? Oh, I'm sure we have some strong opinions there. Vicky, your answer there. Let me know if you want me to read that question again.
Yeah, do you mind read that again? I think
It's in LinkedIn and it says, "What are your thoughts on starting with an accessible design bottom up
mhm,
in contrast with designing and then testing for accessibility?"
mhm. I think that could be like a possibility. The reason why is that like when we talk about accessibility design, people thought that it's going to be, just help the disabled users only. But actually accessibility design is going to help with the normal user as well. Like same thing with when we talked about like how someone is viewing this products outside in the sun. When you design for accessibility, the normal people, go out the sun and they can see just as well. So their experience, in the shade or in the sun is going to be consistent. So that's something like I think if like the company have resources or if you have time to do so, I think that could work as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
what about
and
you?
sorry, my opinion on that would just be absolutely, just like we don't want UX to try to be sprinkled on at the end of a project, like, ooh, now we'll UX this and make it easier to use. I don't like to see projects at the end trying to scramble to be accessible because what they usually end up doing is they install plugins and weird things that try to make a site accessible when it's never been designed for that, and sometimes it doesn't fix anything or everything, and in some rare cases
Mhm,
makes it worse. So I'm with you, Ruchita. I think we should be looking at this from the very beginning and designing for all the different people out there, whether there's mobility, vision, hearing, sight. I said sight. I don't know. I'm about to sneeze. I'm dying with these spring allergies, people. Um, and also, I want to mention that Microsoft has a great model of accessibility that has really influenced me lately. And that is, they remind us that disabilities can be three types. You have situational. Hey, I broke my arm and I can't use it, but eventually it'll heal
mhm,
and I'll use it. There's temporary. Situation was I'm holding a baby, but in a few minutes I won't be holding a baby. But while I'm holding this baby, I can't use this arm. And then temporary was I broke my arm, so maybe you can't use your arm for a month or two. And then there was permanent, which might be someone who is missing some or part of their arm. And it's a great reminder that not everybody who has a disability has it for their whole lives. It could be someone who is just holding a baby right now and has to one hand their phone, and we don't think of them as disabled, but they're definitely not able to use both hands the way we dream that they are. So I think people should look into that model that Microsoft presents, because I think it's a really great way to think about disability as more than the blind person, the person in the wheelchair, the person with the lifelong issue. We've got a couple
mhm.
of questions here. We have how to find beta testers who have accessibility needs. Have you done any work in that where you've looked for people to test things specifically who have accessibility needs?
I think like for product design, like usability testing is like pretty like is like the most important like test, right? Because you need to see if your product is actually work. So if you are doing user testing, I do recommend find the people who has some visual disability or who has like some auditory disability to test out your product to see if it works or not. And for like beta testing, I think there are some like forums and organizations that will kind of hook you up with the people so that you can kind of like test on them as well. So like there are a few I think websites that will allow you to do so. Yeah, I hope I covered the question.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things to that. So in addition to the forums and organizations and sometimes college
Yeah.
communities and groups for different disabilities. There are also certainly you could add it to your screener if you want
Mhm.
to put up a research screener that asks if they have certain disabilities or use certain types of assistive technology. And the final one that I will mention, and I'm forgetting this company's name right now, so I'm a terrible person, but you can probably Google for them. There's a couple of companies who specialize in recruiting UX participants for research or testing who have accessibility needs. Now, this route is not as cheap because you have an outside recruiter and they're doing a great job and they deserve to be paid. And then typically you also have the incentive. So if you're bringing in someone to test, you typically want to be giving them that $10 Amazon gift card, $50 Amazon gift card, $100 Visa card, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So remember that the more recruiting you're doing, the more that's going to cost you, but it's still worth it. You know, whatever, even if it costs your company a few $1,000s to do a round of testing with people with accessibility needs, that's still so much better than all of the trouble your company will have with angry people
Mhm.
contacting customer support that something isn't usable.
Yeah. And actually, like, I did some research on this. So in like 2019, Domino Pizza ran into like one of the biggest accessibility case, where like the blind man cannot really use their product. Um, I think it was both website and their mobile app. It's not really accessible at all. And, the company got sued like yearly, and that's like something, um,
The lawsuits are wild. You
it's
guys can
really,
Google if you guys are into American lawsuits, where the worldwide center of all lawsuits would be America. You can look up ADA Title III
Mhm.
lawsuits, and you will see like Domino's has been sued a zillion times for I
Mhm.
think it was blind people or people with certain visual disabilities couldn't order a pizza
Yeah.
themselves, which makes no sense. Domino's, you have one job: let people order a pizza. We've got lots of questions. Let me throw some more questions out. Melinda says usertesting.com. Melinda, usertesting.com and its many competitors. I'm using Userlytics. They don't pay me to say that, not sponsored. I pay them. These are good systems to use for unmoderated testing, but you would still have to bring in the participants. Sometimes their panel can find people with accessibility needs, but not always. That's all I'm saying. Um,
Mhm.
Swaraj says neumorphism can be considered for small elements like an input field, buttons, or cards. Could color theory be helpful for improving neumorphism? Is it really just about color?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's like if you can test that out and like introduce that, then like again, as I said, like in part one, um, that in a few years maybe like somebody will find a way to make this work, but at the moment like it's not working. So maybe you can test it out, and if it works, then then go ahead. But just remember the usability side of it as well, not just you have to make it pretty. So you're gonna try your best to make it work. Think about usability. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it goes beyond color. I know from some of what I've seen
Mhm.
with neumorphism, some of it is the subtlety of color, like blue, slightly bluer,
Mhm.
slightly bluer. But some of it is hue or saturation. Some of it is shadow, as you talked about earlier. So I think it goes more
Mhm.
than picking better colors. Because someone else
Yeah.
was saying, well, what if your brand color is green? Obviously, green can be difficult for people with green color blindness. What do you
Yeah.
do if your brand color is red or green? And I'm wearing red today, and so are you. What do you do if your brand color is red or green, and by default your brand colors are bad for color blindness? Do you have a suggestion for
Yeah.
that?
I think like for color stuff, right? Think about the people who has the red and green color blindness, which is like the most common kind. Like a lot of people have that. Um, but then think about the people who has like a total complete color blindness, who only see like white. The color is not gonna solve their problems at all. So yeah. That's
Yeah,
my
so
yeah.
so looking at the question again. Yeah, so if a brand color is green, Vicky's got a point in that you definitely don't want to do red things and green things together or near each other because people
Mhm.
will might not be able to tell those apart. Sometimes I try to inspire those brands to use some accent colors. When I worked at Wells Fargo, their brand color was red. Wells Fargo, if you guys bank at Wells Fargo or you've seen a Wells Fargo bank, it's red, red, red. And they had created a color palette that had other colors in it so that they could have more accessible ATMs and other systems. So I think they were using some purples in places, some blues in places, and they also had a green. And so I think that you can expand the palette so that you're not just stuck with, well, our brand color is green, everything's going to be green. Middle fingers up to the people who can't see green. So I think there's more ways to do that. Let's see. We got David, good friend David, says there's a company in Minnesota called WECO, WECO. They have a team with accessibility needs that you can use to test sites. So it sounds like you hire WECO and you pay WECO and they give you some people with accessibility needs to test your stuff. Sounds good to me. Let's see what other questions we have. Is there another way to differentiate except using different colors? I can think of many ways to differentiate. I'm going to throw it at you first. Can you think of other ways to differentiate features and elements other than changing their color?
I think you can look into like topography is going to help with that, and things like borders and different like colors, not with the element, but like colors of the background. The contrast ratio between the element and the background should be visible enough um, to make that happen. So I'm not saying like I'm not talking about like the button, like the color of the button itself, but like the color of like the surrounding elements as well. So things like
Right.
that.
So, right. It's so Nitesh, I would say it's hard to answer that question if we don't know what you're
Yeah,
trying to differentiate. Is it a button? Is it
exactly.
a card or container of some
Right.
sort? What is this
Yeah.
thing? Martin says, "How much did Domino's get sued for?" I don't know, but I think it was millions, and that's been going very strangely. Um,
Yeah.
Anna P is here. Hello, Anna P. And it says, when I was in Japan, I loved how it seemed like they really did think of many users. And this is based on the products. I didn't dive into sites. I like to look outside my zone and see other approaches and perspectives, like different hues and tones of the same color.
Mhm.
Okay, that's not
Mhm.
totally a question, but thank you, Anna. Um, Back to Martin. So this is a question we started answering before, and then we got off track a little bit. He says, "Vicky, how did you get started in accessibility? Any course or book recommendations?"
So I got started because I was actually I was at an Adobe event where they were talking about how we like as a designer we should start to think about accessibility. And when I learned that there's only 1% of the website are accessible right now in the market, it kind of make me like a little bit like mad, you know. So as a designer, I trying to like dig into it and like learn more about it, especially like talking to people who's in the industry. So yeah, I had some mentors that I talked to, and I also read some books. I don't have it here, but there are like books about how you can apply accessibility for any digital product. So there are a lot out there, which I will send it to Debbie later, and you can take a look as well.
Yeah, send it to me and we'll get it in the description in the YouTube and also the podcasts for people just on the listening side of things. And if I can answer that one too, even though I'm not Vicky, I first learned more about accessibility in 2012 when I was contracting at Wells Fargo. And we had a full time guy whose job it was to shepherd accessibility and make sure we were meeting certain standards and push back on people if we were not meeting those standards. And I remember Wells Fargo also hired a full time worker who was blind, and that guy would just test all of our stuff constantly with his iPad, with his computer, with his phone, and be able to come back to us and say, I couldn't transfer money. He should be able to do everything. So I didn't end up reading books, but I do follow some people on LinkedIn like Sherry Byrne-Haber, who's a good person to follow.
Yeah.
That's Sheri. Byrne is
Mhm.
Byrne, and Haber is Haber. Please find her. She's a
Yeah.
great person to follow. She's been a guest on our show. Check back on the Accessibility podcast, and that was her.
Mhm.
We've got more
Yeah. And
questions. Oh, go ahead.
Sherry is actually the one who kind of helped me to get started. So shout out to Sherry.
Yes, from me as well. We plan to have her on next year again, if not sooner. Next year. Why am I thinking about that? Randy says, "Greetings, everyone." Hello, Randy. Martin says, "We need more designers like Vicky." Very true. Oz says, "How do you make the difficult decision? We can't satisfy everyone, and it's time to move on." I don't know if you've been in that situation yet because of some of the jobs that you've had or haven't had. Have you worked somewhere or been on a project where people have said, "Oh, all this accessibility, too much time, too much money, let's just move on"?
I think that's the problem with most of the companies right now, especially like smaller company where they don't really have the budget to test this out. But then think again with accessibility design, you don't really like your goal is to try to like make everyone happy, but then that's not really gonna like happen so quick. So your goal should be like making as many as like people like happy, meaning just try to have it work for like as much people as like as many as people as you can.
Yeah,
So I think that's the thing that you should think about. Yeah.
when I've run into this at jobs where I've worked, I try to remind people of somebody they know that has an accessibility need because either we have accessibility needs, or we know someone who does. And so when people start acting like, "Oh, it's not important if blah, blah, blah," and I'll be like, "Well, isn't the mayor of your
Yeah.
town visually impaired and going blind?" Or, "Hey,
Yeah.
do you have a grandma who doesn't see very well?" Or, "Hey, do you have a cousin who maybe lost a limb or part of a limb, maybe in the military or in an accident?" And then if you can find
Mhm.
somebody they know, then it starts to feel a little bit more real. But I find until people realize they know someone like this, then it's kind of like, "Oh yeah, well, blind people don't use our company."
Yeah. And I
Really?
think like you can like do some research on the statistics as well, because when you kind of find out that like 1 in 4 people need help with accessibility technology, then you can think about how much like how many customer you lost if you don't accommodate to their needs.
Yeah, if you're saying that 61 million Americans are classified as having a disability, and I know that under the ADA, disability is you have cancer, you have depression. There's even things on the ADA list that some people don't think of as disabilities. But if you have depression or you're going through cancer treatment, you probably do not feel like you're other self. So you would understand that there's disability there. Um, so I and that to also answer Oz and kind of answer Stephanie's new question, which is how would you try to convince developers to also produce accessible code? There's so much you can do with colors, but a lot of issues come from crappy HTML. My quick answer, and then I'll pass it to you, Vicky, is this just has to be part of UX strategy. We can't make accessibility something we throw darts at later and hope we get it.
Mhm.
We have to say part of our strategy is we are meeting these standards for these people, and hopefully every year you keep raising your standards. What else do you think
Yeah.
about trying to convince people to care more about accessibility?
I think like within like organization, like people should put on the mindset that like accessibility like product is not just the responsible of responsibility of the accessibility like department. So as I mentioned like earlier, like as designer and developers, you if you have the like just a little bit like maybe basic knowledge about that, then you kind of contribute to helping with accessibility like products already. So again, like it just really start like with individual. So don't rely on just the the organization, like accessibility, like department, but like think about how you can like incorporate that into your team and into your everyday like task as well.
Yeah, and another thing is people can try using some of these assisted devices. You know, you can put
Yeah.
on a blindfold and try to transfer money in your online banking with
Mhm.
what the screen reads to you. Screen readers are built into Mac and Windows. They're built into Android and iOS. You can try some of this yourself. Now, it's not totally realistic because you might know the product or you might be peeking,
Mhm.
but you can try a little bit of this yourself with different accessibility things and get a little bit of a picture of it. Martin says, as
Yeah.
a developer, Neumorphism looks like a nightmare to code. I can't speak to that, but I believe you. Um, uh, Oh, okay. Oz says, no, that's not what I mean. I don't mean this casually. I'm asking seriously about limited resources and time. And how do you decide we've honestly done what we can do? I think I might take that one because I'm not sure you've worked a lot of different jobs where you've bumped into this.
Yeah.
And
Go
he's
ahead.
yeah, sorry. He's kind of asking, what happens in companies when they say that's all that we've done. Oz, you're totally right. There's definitely a point at which someone says, this is what we're doing for accessibility, and that's as far as we go. It works with a screen reader. It's colorblind friendly. We passed these industry standards, and we put up a transcript for our videos, and that's it. And then hopefully an accessibility champion is letting people know what else they can and should do, or that there are higher standards to shoot for. But unfortunately, at some companies right now, until they get a lot of complaints or until they get sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act, some companies are not changing, and some companies are meeting the absolute minimum standards. And some companies are doing nothing because the current law in America, under Section 508, did you study Section 508 yet,
Mhm.
Vicky? Did you
Oh,
study
me?
Section 508?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did some study about that, some research about like, the web accessibility standard as well. So I know like the, what is going on in
And you
there.
guys can look this up too. Section 508 basically says that in America, the current law is you must meet these accessibility standards for digital stuff if you're a federal government, state government, or municipal government website, that these laws currently don't apply to Domino's Pizza. But yet, Domino's
Mhm.
Pizza is still being sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act because just like you couldn't have a building without a ramp and tell people with wheelchairs too bad, Domino's shouldn't have a system where a blind person can't order pizza and you say too bad. So even though it's
Mhm.
technically not the law yet, companies are still being sued, and
Yeah.
accessibility champions are hoping that
Mhm.
some of these lawsuits will bring the topic to light, and that more companies will decide to invest in improving their accessibility versus investing in lawyers and defending lawsuits. Oz
Mhm.
says that's not where I'm coming from. Okay, so I'm just not getting Oz today. Sorry, Oz, I am not too sure what you mean today. I thought I was answering your question and I'm not getting you, so I apologize. Martin says, if I have a mobile app that goes viral and isn't accessible, I can get sued for millions of dollars. Maybe. I'm not a lawyer.
Mhm.
I can't say what kind of lawsuit flies and what kind of lawsuit doesn't. I would say look up ADA Title 3, which is usually III, Title 3 lawsuits, and take a look at what's going on out there, because there are lawsuits happening, and they're not just for government sites and services. So,
Mhm.
it's an open question. I don't totally know.
Yeah. And to add on to that, I was doing some research on the report from last year about the lawsuit, and there's like 21% of the company who got sued previously. They still got sued multiple times. So basically, they don't really like try so much to, get out of it. So I don't know like what to say here, but I just yeah, that's like the stat I found very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and guys, we have a couple of minutes left, and then I actually have a hard stop today. I have another call to jump to, so we're gonna answer just another question or two, and then we'll have to run with thanks to Vicky today. Kranti says, apart from color blindness, contrast ratio, what else is under accessibility, and are there tools that we can use to test those? Vicky, do you want to take that one?
Yes. So speaking of tools, I will leave a bunch of tools to Debbie later so you guys can take a look. And speaking of accessibility, yeah, you're right. It's not just about like color, visual, and stuff like that. There are other things like auditory, so people who have like a hard time like hearing, and cognitive issue, meaning have like trouble like processing, or like with learning disability and things like that. And then there's neurological, and then physical, and also like speech, and then like visual. So like there's like a bunch of different types going on. So it's not just about how it looks.
Yeah, and remember,
And a
there's
lot of
situational, temporary, and permanent. So we've got a lot of different categories of people that we have to make this work for.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, that's why it's really important to design for accessibility, and that's my goal, is to advocate for that.
Me too. And Oz wrote in again, but Oz says, I'm asking seriously about balancing an earnest effort and getting something done. Oz, most of the companies I've worked at didn't want to put in an earnest effort. So I'm not sure. Martin, Oz is a good friend of mine. You can back down. So Oz, I'm sorry I'm not totally understanding you, but I would say most companies I've worked at have not put in an earnest effort. Some of the companies that I'm a paying customer of, I don't believe have put in an earnest effort. I don't know if suing people is going to help that or change that or when it will. But your question to me, and I must be misinterpreting it, but it sounds like you're saying you imagine that people are inside these companies maybe advocating for this, and then eventually they just can't do everything. Like Vicky just gave us this long list of all of these types of people we have to design for, and someone might say, oh man, we can't do all that. But I would say most companies where I've worked have paid little or no attention to accessibility. People usually assume they are edge cases, they are minorities, or blind people don't use our system. Or, I remind people of a Canadian show I watched where a blind guy is the host, and he went to a car show to sit in cars. Now you're thinking he probably won't be driving those cars, and you are correct. He will not be driving those cars, but he wanted to be a passenger in the cars, and he wanted to feel the dashboards and feel which cars would he like to be a passenger in because he can control the radio, he can control the air. And the car he hated the most was the Tesla because it had a touchscreen. And as a blind person, he can't change the radio station. He can't adjust the climate. He has to ask someone for help. So to me, a blind person is a car customer, albeit as a passenger. We have to think about these people too. Everybody, you're asking so many questions, and we're out of time today. We've run late. I'm so sorry. Everybody, please, we'll certainly do accessibility again. We'll bring your questions, bring them to office hours. Vicky, thank you so much for coming today. Let everybody know where they can find you and follow you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And you guys can find me right here. I think I'm pointing at the right one,
That's your
but like,
name.
there's my name right there. Yeah, so my name right there. Just look me up on LinkedIn and on Medium as well. And then if you have questions, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. So yeah,
And
thank you guys so much, and thank you.
Yeah, and for
Oh, go ahead.
people who are listening and not looking, because our podcast goes out without video, I'm going to spell your name. Your first name is Uyen, like Nancy, Vicky, Vicky, and last name Vo. So if you are listening but not watching, go Google that, find Vicky everywhere, and follow her wherever you can. Sorry we ran out of time today. Accessibility is such a big and important topic. It's got so many dimensions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the aspects of everybody's questions and some of your follow-up questions, but you can be sure that we will cover this topic again. So on that note, I'm going to look for my ending video and sing us out of here. Vicky, thank you again so much, and I will see you around LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.